For Carmen Smith Hope had a price tag $50,000, and all she had left in the world was a crumpled $2 bill tucked into the worn pocket of her waitress apron. This wasn't just money for rent or food. It was the last barrier between her mother and a devastating illness. Every customer she served, every cup of coffee she poured, was a painful reminder of how far she was from that impossible sum. What can you do with $2? You can buy a bus ticket home to save your tired feet. Or you can change a life. In a single moment of gut-wrenching choice, Carmen would use her last $2 on a complete stranger, setting in motion a chain of events that would unravel a secret buried for years and bring her face to face with one of the most powerful men in the world. This is the story of how the smallest act of kindness can echo into a life-altering thunderstorm. The clatter of ceramic on linoleum was the soundtrack to Carmen Smith's life. It was a symphony of cheap coffee mugs, heavy plates of bacon and eggs, and the relentless ticking of the large, grease-stained clock above the pass-through window of the Morning Dove Diner. At 24, Carmen moved with an efficiency that bordered on exhaustion, her body a well-oiled machine programmed for the morning rush. Refill coffee, take an order, clear a table, smile. Repeat. But today the smile was a lead weight on her face. Each movement was heavier, each step a monumental effort. In the pocket of her faded blue apron, her fingers kept tracing the outline of a single crumpled $2 bill. It was her entire net worth. $2, the last of her tips from the past 3 days after she'd wired every other cent to the long-term care facility, where her mother Evelyn was living out her days in a slow, cruel fade. An hour ago, during her 10-minute break, she had huddled in the alley behind the diner, the stench of the dumpster, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic smell of the hospital she'd just called. Dr. Evans's voice was kind, but the words were brutal. "Carmen, your mother's condition. The standard treatments aren't working anymore. We're seeing a significant acceleration in her neurodegeneration." Carmen had squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her forehead against the cold brick wall. "What does that mean?" "It means we're running out of time," the doctor said, his voice laced with practiced sympathy. "There is one option, an experimental treatment protocol. It's new and it's not covered by any insurance, but the preliminary results on patients with similar conditions, they're promising, Carmen. Genuinely promising." A tiny flickering ember of hope ignited in her chest. How promising it could potentially halt the progression, maybe even reverse some of the recent damage. It would give her back some quality of life, give you back some time with her. The ember roared into a flame. Time. That's all she wanted. More time with the woman who used to sing her to sleep, the woman who taught her how to bake and how to be brave. Okay. She'd breathed, her voice trembling. "Okay, what do we need to do?" Then came the hammer blow. The initial cost to enroll in the trial and receive the first round of treatment is $50,000. The flame was instantly extinguished, leaving behind nothing but cold, bitter ash. $50,000. It might as well have been 50 million. She made just enough to cover her tiny apartment's rent, the facility's copay, and a meager diet of instant noodles and toast. She sometimes worked double shifts that stretched for 16 hours, and after all of it, she would be lucky to have an extra $50, let alone 50,000. "Carmen, are you still there?" Dr. Evans had asked softly. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible. "I'm here." She had ended the call in a daze, the doctor's final words, "I'm so sorry," echoing in her ears. Now back in the diner, the noise and bustle felt like a different universe. A man at table 4 was complaining that his toast was too dark. A child at table 6 was gleefully smearing ketchup all over the vinyl booth, and in her pocket, the $2 bill felt like a cruel joke. It was her bus fare home. Without it, she'd have to walk the 4 miles back to her apartment after her shift ended at 3 p.m., which would make her late for her second job stocking shelves at a grocery store, a job she desperately needed to keep. Her friend and fellow waitress Sarah bumped her hip as she passed with a loaded tray. "You okay, Smith? You look like you've seen a ghost." Carmen forced a weak smile. "Just a long morning." Sarah's eyes, sharp and knowing, scanned her face. The hospital call. Carmen just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Sarah didn't press. She just squeezed Carmen's shoulder before expertly depositing the plates on a table. Everyone at the diner knew about Evelyn. They knew why Carmen took every extra shift, why she never went out, why there were permanent, faint purple smudges of exhaustion under her eyes. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a new customer. Carmen mechanically grabbed a menu and a glass of water. It was a man in a simple but well-kept coat, probably in his late 40s. He had kind eyes, but they were shadowed with a deep weariness that Carmen recognized instantly. It was the same weariness she saw in her own reflection. He sat at a small table by the window and ordered a black coffee. Just a coffee. She poured it for him from the perpetually warm pot, the dark liquid swirling into the thick white mug. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice quiet. The question was so simple, so direct, that it caught her off guard. She found herself nodding before she could stop. "You could say that." "I know the feeling," he said, offering a small, sad smile. Sometimes the world just decides to pile it all on at once. She left him with his coffee, but his words stuck with her. For a moment, she felt a flicker of connection, a shared understanding in the anonymous churn of the city. She watched as he stared out the window, lost in thought, taking slow sips from his cup. He was still there 20 minutes later, when the diner had cleared out a little. He finally stood up, stretched, and walked to the register where Carmen was standing. "Just the coffee," he said, reaching into his back pocket. His hand came out empty. A puzzled look crossed his face. He patted his coat pockets, then his pants pockets again, a slow, dawning horror spreading across his features. "Oh no," he muttered, his face flushing with embarrassment. I must have left my wallet in my other jacket." "I am so sorry. I live nearby. I can run back and grab it. I promise I'll be right back." Carmen looked at him. She saw the genuine mortification in his eyes. He wasn't a grifter. He was just a man having a bad day, a day that had just gotten worse. The coffee was $2, the exact amount in her pocket. Her mind raced. "It's your bus fare. Your legs are already aching. You'll be late for your second job. You could get fired. You can't get fired." But then she looked at the man's face again, at the profound, soul-deep tiredness in his eyes that mirrored her own. She thought of his words. Sometimes the world just decides to pile it all on at once. In that moment, her own problems felt so vast, so insurmountable, that this one small, fixable problem in front of her seemed like a gift. She couldn't raise $50,000. She couldn't cure her mother. But she could do this. She reached into her apron, her fingers closing around the crumpled bill. "Don't worry about it," she said, her voice softer than she intended. The man whose name she didn't even know looked at her confused. "What, I've got it?" she said, pulling out the $2 bill and smoothing it on the counter. She rang up the sale. "Total $2. Payment $2. Change $0. The man stared at the bill, then back at her, his eyes widening in disbelief. "No, I can't let you do that. I'll be right back, I promise." "It's just coffee," Carmen said, offering him a genuine, unforced smile for the first time all day. "Someone bought me a coffee once when I was having a terrible day. Just pay it forward sometime." He seemed lost for words. He stood there for a long moment, studying her face. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Carmen." "Carmen," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "I'm Marcus, and I will pay this back. Thank you. More than you know." He turned and walked out the door. Carmen watched him go, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her. A profound sense of peace from the small act of grace warring with the sharp, terrifying reality of her situation. She was now quite literally penniless, and she had a 4-mile walk ahead of her. The peace began to fade as the minutes ticked by. 1 hour later, as the lunchtime rush began to build, Marcus had not returned. The weight of her choice and the $50,000 hole in her life began to settle in her bones, heavier than ever. The diner clock seemed to mock Carmen with every tick. 1 hour passed. Then 90 minutes. The lunch rush hit like a tidal wave, and for a while she was too busy to think. She juggled plates of burgers and fries, refilled endless glasses of iced tea, and forced her smile to stay in place. But in the brief lulls, her mind would return to Marcus. Sarah cornered her by the milkshake machine. "Did that guy who forgot his wallet ever come back?" Carmen shook her head, trying to appear nonchalant as she wiped down the stainless steel counter. "Nope. No big deal. It was just $2. Sarah gave her a look that was a mixture of pity and exasperation. "Carmen, it was your last $2. It was your bus fare. Don't pretend it was nothing. It's fine, Sarah. I'll walk. It's not fine, it's 4 miles. You'll be exhausted before you even get to the Piggly Wiggly for your shift. Henderson will have your hide if you're late again." Mr. Henderson, the diner's owner, was a stickler for punctuality. He wasn't a bad man, but he ran a tight ship, and Carmen was already on thin ice after being 5 minutes late last week. The worry gnawed at her, a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She had been foolish, incredibly, stupendously foolish. What was she thinking, that a small act of kindness would magically solve her problems? The world didn't work that way. The world took, and it didn't give back just because you were nice to a stranger over a $2 coffee. At 3:00 p.m. she clocked out. Her shift was over. Her feet were already throbbing a dull, persistent ache that radiated up her calves. She changed out of her uniform and into her street clothes in the tiny, cramped employee bathroom. As she tied the laces on her worn-out sneakers, the full reality of her decision crashed down on her. The momentary peace she'd felt after helping Marcus was gone, replaced by a rising tide of panic. She stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the pavement. The 4-mile walk stretched before her like a desert. Each step was a reminder of her emptiness, the emptiness of her pockets, the emptiness of her stomach, which she hadn't had time to fill, and the gaping, terrifying emptiness of her future. The first mile was fueled by anger. Anger at herself for her naivete, anger at Marcus for not returning, anger at the universe for dealing her and her mother such a cruel hand. Why them her mother had been the kindest person she'd ever known, a woman who volunteered at the local soup kitchen and always had a spare dollar for someone in need. Carmen had tried to live by her example. Pay it forward, she'd told Marcus. The words now tasted like ash in her mouth. The second mile was marked by despair. The anger burned out, leaving a hollow ache. The city seemed to taunt her with its wealth. Gleaming cars sped past their occupants, oblivious to the tired girl walking on the sidewalk. She passed by boutique shops with dresses in the window that cost more than her rent, and restaurants where people spent more on a single meal than she earned in a week. The $50,000 figure loomed in her mind, an insurmountable mountain. She felt like an ant trying to climb Everest. It was impossible, hopeless. By the third mile, all that was left was a bone-deep weariness. Her body ached, her mind was numb. She walked on autopilot, her gaze fixed on the cracked pavement in front of her. She started to bargain with a god she wasn't sure she believed in. Please just let me get through this. Let me keep my job. Let my mum be okay. I'll do anything. As she finally turned onto her own street, her apartment building a drab brick box with peeling paint had never looked so beautiful. She was 45 minutes later than usual. She would be late for her second job. There was no way to avoid it now. She fumbled with her keys, her hands clumsy with exhaustion, and let herself into the building. Taped to her apartment door was a bright pink piece of paper. Not a friendly note. An official notice. Her heart sank even further. Past due notice. It was from the landlord, a man named Mr. Petrov, who valued prompt payment above all else. She was 3 days late on rent. The notice was a final warning, its bureaucratic language cold and unforgiving. Failure to remit payment in full within 48 hours will result in the initiation of eviction proceedings. Carmen leaned her head against the cool metal of the door, the paper crinkling under her hand. It was all unraveling. Her finances, her jobs, her home. Everything was falling apart. The act of kindness that had felt so right in the moment now seemed like the tipping point in her own personal avalanche. She had tried to stop one man's bad day from getting worse, and in doing so, she had potentially ruined her own life. Tears she hadn't even realized she was holding back began to stream down her face. They were silent, hot tears of pure, undiluted misery. She slid down the door and sat on the grimy hallway carpet, pulling her knees to her chest, and for the first time since her mother's diagnosis, she let herself truly break. She had nothing left. No money, no energy, and worst of all, no hope. The $2 hadn't just been bus fare. It had been the last thread she was clinging to, a tangible symbol that she wasn't completely at rock bottom. Now the thread was broken, and she was in a free fall. After a few minutes of silent, gut-wrenching sobs in the hallway, Carmen pushed herself to her feet. Crying wouldn't pay the rent or get her to her second job. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a deep breath that shuddered through her chest, and unlocked her apartment door. The small space was neat but bare. Most of the furniture was second-hand, and there were no decorations on the walls, save for a single framed picture on her nightstand, a photo of her and her mother on a beach trip years ago, both of them laughing, their faces bright with sun and joy. It felt like a picture of two entirely different people from a different lifetime. She had just enough time to splash some cold water on her face and change into her grocery store polo shirt before she had to leave again. There was a half-eaten box of crackers on the counter, and she shoved a few in her mouth, the dry crumbs scratching her throat. No time for a real meal. The walk to the Piggly Wiggly was only 10 minutes, but it felt like another marathon. When she pushed through the automatic doors, the store manager, a portly man named Dave, was standing by, the time clock tapping his foot impatiently. "Smith, you're 22 minutes late," he said, his voice flat. "I'm so sorry, Dave. My bus was running behind." The lie felt clumsy and obvious. Dave sighed, adjusting his glasses. "Look, Carmen, I know you've got a lot on your plate." "I do. But I'm running a business. I need people I can rely on. This is your second late arrival this month. I'm giving you an official written warning. One more, and I have to let you go. Understood?" "Understood." She mumbled, her gaze fixed on the floor. "It won't happen again." He handed her a clipboard. We got a big shipment of canned goods. Aisle 5 needs a complete restock. Get to it." The next 4 hours were a blur of mindless physical labor. Carmen lifted heavy boxes of canned corn peas and beans, her muscles screaming in protest. Every can she placed on the shelf felt like a tiny weight, adding to the crushing burden she was already carrying. The repetitiveness of the task was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed her mind to wander, but her thoughts were a toxic swamp of anxiety. Eviction. Fired. Mom. $50,000. The words circled endlessly, a mantra of doom. When her shift finally ended at 9 p.m., she felt hollowed out, a mere shell of a person. The walk home was dark and cold. The city lights, usually a comfort, seemed harsh and alien. She replayed the day in her head, dissecting every moment, every decision. The image of Marcus's tired, grateful face kept coming back to her. Was it worth it? Was that brief moment of human connection worth the disastrous consequences that had followed? She didn't have an answer. As she turned the final corner onto her street, she saw it. A car. But it wasn't just any car. It was a long, sleek, black sedan, the kind she'd only ever seen in movies. It was parked directly in front of her apartment building, its polished surface reflecting the orange glow of the streetlights. It was so out of place in her rundown neighborhood that it looked like a spaceship had landed. A man in a crisp, dark suit stood beside the passenger door, his posture rigid and professional. He looked like a bodyguard or a chauffeur. Carmen's first instinct was fear. Was it Mr. Petrov? Had he sent someone to intimidate her over the rent? Her steps faltered, and she considered turning around and walking away. But where would she go? She squared her shoulders and continued walking, her heart hammering against her ribs. As she approached, the man in the suit turned his head. His expression was neutral, unreadable. "Carmen Smith?" he asked. His voice was deep and steady. She froze. "Yes." The man didn't smile. He simply nodded and opened the rear passenger door. "Mr. Finch will see you now." Carmen stared at the open door, then at the man. "Mr. Who?" "I think you have the wrong person." "I don't know any Mr. Finch." From the shadowy interior of the car, a second voice spoke. It was calm, cultured, and carried an unmistakable air of authority. "I assure you, Ms. Smith, we have the right person. Please get in. We won't take much of your time." Carmen's mind was reeling. This made no sense. It had to be a mistake, or a prank, or something much, much worse. Yet curiosity and a strange sense of fatalism warred with her fear. What else could possibly go wrong today? Hesitantly, she peered into the back of the car. The interior was a world away from her own. It smelled of rich leather and quiet power. Sitting on the far side was a man who looked to be in his late 60s. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit with a head of thick silver hair perfectly combed. His face was lined, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. This was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, and sitting next to him was Marcus. Carmen's jaw dropped. He was wearing a suit now, not the simple coat from the diner. The weary, defeated look was gone, replaced by a quiet professionalism. He looked different, more confident. He gave her a small, apologetic smile. "Carmen," Marcus said. "Please, it's okay." Her head was spinning. What was going on? How did they find her? Why were they here in this ridiculously expensive car outside her apartment building? The older man, Mr. Finch, gestured to the empty seat opposite him. "Please, Mrs. Smith, it's cold out. We have something important to discuss with you." Driven by a confusion so profound, it overwhelmed her fear. Carmen did the only thing that made sense, and no sense at all. She slid into the plush leather seat of the silent waiting car. The chauffeur closed the door behind her with a soft, solid thud, sealing her inside with the two men and 1,000 unanswered questions. The world outside her world of overdue rent and aching feet fell away, replaced by the hushed, surreal atmosphere of wealth and power. The interior of the car was like a silent, luxurious cocoon, insulating Carmen from the sounds of her own neighborhood. The engine was running, but it was a barely perceptible hum. For a moment, nobody spoke. Carmen sat on the edge of the seat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her eyes darting between the older man and Marcus. Finally, the man with the silver hair broke the silence. His voice was smoother than she expected, with a gravelly undertone of age and command. "Ms. Smith, my name is Alfred Finch. I apologize for the dramatic arrival, but we felt this was a matter best discussed in person." And promptly, he gestured toward Marcus. "I believe you've already met my head of security." Marcus Thorne, head of security. The title hung in the air, completely recontextualizing her encounter at the diner. The man she had thought was just another down-on-his-luck soul was the protector of one of the wealthiest men in the city. The forgotten wallet suddenly seemed less like a simple mistake, and more like a scene from a play she hadn't known she was in. Marcus spoke his tone earnest. "Carmen, I am so sorry I didn't come back to the diner. When I told Mr. Finch what happened, well, he insisted on handling it himself. I truly intended to pay you back immediately." Carmen found her voice, though it came out as a squeak. How did you find me?" Alfred Finch answered. "My company has certain resources, Mrs. Smith. A first name and a place of employment are more than enough to locate someone in this city. It took my team less than 20 minutes. The ease with which he said it was chilling. It spoke of a level of power and influence she could barely comprehend. They hadn't just found her. They likely knew her address, her work schedule, her mother's name, the very balance of her non-existent bank account. Why she asked the question directed at both of them. Why go to all this trouble for $2? Mr. Finch leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes studying her intently. The air in the car seemed to grow thicker, charged with purpose. Because it wasn't about the $2, he said, his voice dropping a little. It was about what those $2 represented. Marcus informed me of the situation. He also told me that based on his observation of you, he suspected you were not in a position to be giving money away. Am I correct in that assumption? Carmen felt a hot flush of embarrassment. She didn't answer, just stared at her own worn sneakers on the impossibly plush carpet of the car. So he did a little more digging. Mr. Finch continued his tone, softening almost imperceptibly. He learned about your mother, Evelyn, her condition at the Northwood Care Facility. He learned about your 2 jobs, your financial struggles. And he learned that the $2 you gave him was in all likelihood the very last money you had to your name. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. And you gave it away. To a stranger. For a cup of coffee. You asked for nothing in return. You expected nothing in return. In fact, you faced a significant personal cost for your action, a long walk home, a reprimand at your second job. Carmen felt completely exposed, as if he had peeled back her skin and was examining the inner workings of her life. She looked at Marcus, who met her gaze with an expression of deep respect. "Ms. Smith, Alfred Finch," said his voice, regaining its firm, businesslike edge. "I have spent my life building an empire, Finch Enterprises. I am a very wealthy man. And in my experience, people who are near power and money are rarely what they seem. Their kindness is often a currency, an investment they expect to be repaid with interest. True, selfless, character-defining integrity. That is the rarest commodity in the world." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a long, elegant checkbook. With a gold pen, he began to write. Carmen watched, mesmerized by the smooth, confident strokes. "I am the head of the Finch Family Foundation," he went on, not looking up from his task. "Our philanthropic branch. We donate hundreds of millions of dollars a year to various causes. But recently I have become disillusioned. I feel the money is often squandered by bureaucracy, by people who lack the genuine compassion to ensure it reaches those who truly need it. I have been searching for someone to lead a new initiative, a hyper-local direct impact fund, a person who understands struggle not in theory but in practice, a person whose moral compass is unshakable even when, especially when they have nothing to gain." He finished writing, tore the check from the book with a crisp, definitive sound, and held it out to her. "This is for $50,000, he said, plainly. Carmen's breath hitched in her throat. Her eyes flew to the check, seeing the number written out in elegant script, $50,000. The impossible sum, the price of hope. It was right there in her grasp. "This will cover the initial treatment for your mother," Mr. Finch stated, not as an offer, but as a fact. "Consider it a signing bonus." Her head snapped up. A signing bonus. "For what I am offering you a job, Ms. Smith," he said. "I want you to run the new Community Grace Initiative for my foundation. Your starting salary will be $120,000 per year with a full benefits package and a housing stipend. Your sole responsibility will be to find people and small grassroots organizations in this city who need help and to provide it to them directly with minimal red tape. You will have a discretionary budget of $5 million to start." Carmen stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. Her mind simply refused to process the words. It was too much, too fast, too impossible. This was the kind of thing that happened in fairy tales, not in real life, to tired waitresses with overdue rent. You want to hire me?" she stammered. "To manage $5 million, I'm a waitress. I don't have a college degree. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You have something far more valuable than a degree." Alfred Finch countered his gaze, unwavering. "You have character. You have empathy, born of genuine hardship. The rest can be taught. My team will provide you with all the training and support you need. I am not hiring your resume, Miss Smith. I am hiring the person who used her last $2 to buy a stranger a cup of coffee." He pushed the check closer to her. "This is real. The job is real. The only question is whether you will accept." Carmen looked from the check to Mr. Finch's expectant face, then to Marcus, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. Her entire world had been turned upside down in the span of 10 minutes. 1 hour ago she was stocking cans, drowning in despair. Now she was being offered a lifeline, so incredible it felt like a dream. The money for her mother, a salary that would change her life, a chance to do good, to help people like her. It was everything she could have ever wished for, and more. But a small, cynical voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. It's too good to be true. Men like this don't exist. There's always a catch. She looked down at the check again. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, not the tired, faded woman in the nursing home, but the laughing woman on the beach. This check wasn't just paper and ink. It was a chance to see that laugh again. Whatever the catch was, whatever the risks were, she had to take it. For her mom. Her hand trembled as she reached out and took the check from Alfred Finch's steady grasp. The paper felt heavy real. "Okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I accept." A rare, thin smile touched Alfred Finch's lips. "Excellent. Marcus will be your point of contact. He will arrange for everything." Your employment begins tomorrow." He leaned back against the leather seat the deal concluded. "Now I believe you have a landlord to deal with." The next few weeks were a whirlwind that tore Carmen's old life from its foundations and rebuilt it into something unrecognizable. The first order of business was the check. The next morning, with a sense of unreality, she walked into a bank not to cash a meager paycheck, but to deposit a sum that made the teller's eyes widen. By noon, the funds were cleared. By 1 o'clock, she had made the call to Dr. Evans. The silence on the other end of the line was followed by a choked, emotional, "Carmen, this is a miracle." Her mother was enrolled in the experimental treatment program to begin the following week. True to his word, Marcus Thorne became her guide. He was efficient, kind, and unflappable. He handled the irate Mr. Petrov, delivering a certified check for 3 months' rent that left the landlord speechless. He then informed Carmen that the foundation had secured a new apartment for her in a safe, clean building downtown as part of her housing stipend, and a moving company would be there on Saturday. Her first day at the Finch Foundation was terrifying. She walked into a lobby of gleaming marble and glass, feeling utterly like an imposter in the new, simple but professional clothes Marcus had helped her pick out. The Finch Enterprises Tower was a monument to wealth and power, a steel and glass behemoth that scraped the sky. Her office on the 34th floor had a floor-to-ceiling window with a breathtaking view of the entire city. It was larger than her entire old apartment. An executive assistant named Jessica was assigned to her, a sharp, patient woman who showed her how to use the complex phone system, manage her calendar, and navigate the foundation's intricate software. For the first month, Carmen spent 8 hours a day in training, learning about grant proposals, financial oversight, non-profit law, and community outreach strategies. Her head swam with information. She felt like she was cramming for an exam she was destined to fail. But a strange thing happened. She started to understand. The work resonated with a part of her she never knew existed. When she began reviewing preliminary cases for the Community Grace Initiative, the names and stories on the pages weren't just data points. They were real people. The single mother whose car broke down and couldn't get to work, the elderly couple who couldn't afford a wheelchair ramp for their home, the community garden in a food desert that needed funding for soil and tools. She remembered the feeling of helplessness, the crushing weight of a small problem that snowballs into a catastrophe. And now, with a few keystrokes and a signature, she could fix it. Her first official act was approving a $1,500 grant to a woman who needed her car repaired to keep her job. When Carmen called the woman to give her the news, the sound of relieved, grateful weeping on the other end of the line solidified her purpose. This was real. She could do this. Alfred Finch remained a distant but powerful presence. He checked in with her once a week via a brief, formal video call. He never praised her directly, but his questions were pointed and insightful, and she could tell he was pleased with her progress. He seemed to value efficiency and results above all else. He was a man of immense intellect and discipline, but there was a profound wall around him, a cool detachment that kept everyone at a distance. Meanwhile, a true miracle was unfolding. Her mother's treatment was working. After the first round, Evelyn became more lucid. The fog that had clouded her mind for so long began to recede. During one visit, her mother looked at her, really looked at her and said, "Carmen, my sweet girl, you look tired." For the first time in over a year, she recognized her. Carmen wept, holding her mother's frail hand, feeling a joy so pure and overwhelming it was physically painful. The $50,000 had bought back her mother. Life settled into a new, unbelievable rhythm. She was good at her job. She moved into her new apartment. For the first time in her life, she wasn't living on the brink of disaster. She was secure. She was making a difference. The cynical voice in her head, the one that whispered about a catch, grew fainter and fainter until it was almost gone. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, about 2 months into her new role, Carmen was deep into her work. The initiative was expanding, and Mr. Finch wanted to identify a whole town or community that could benefit from a large-scale revitalization project. New infrastructure, healthcare funding, small business grants. The idea was to find a place that had been left behind, a community that had suffered a major economic blow and never recovered. Jessica had compiled a list of potential candidates' towns across the state that had been devastated by factory closures or industrial decline. Carmen was sifting through digital archives, reading old news reports, and looking at economic data. One name on the list caught her eye: Silver Creek. It was a small rural town, about 200 miles north. A little shiver went down her spine. She knew that name. It was her hometown. She and her mother had left when she was 10 after her father passed away. They had moved to the city for a fresh start. She hadn't been back since. A wave of nostalgia washed over her as she clicked on the file. She saw pictures of the familiar town square, the old movie theater, the river that ran through the valley. The report detailed the town's history. For 50 years, its primary employer had been a chemical processing plant, a subsidiary of a larger corporation. Then, about 20 years ago, the plant had closed down, crippling the local economy. But it was the details that followed that made her blood run cold. The report mentioned lingering environmental concerns and community health issues. Carmen, using the powerful research tools at her disposal, started digging deeper. She pulled up geological surveys, EPA reports, and a trove of old archived newspaper articles from the Silver Creek Herald. She found a series of articles from the late 1990s detailing a lawsuit. A group of local residents had sued the chemical plant's parent company, alleging that for years the plant had been improperly disposing of chemical byproducts, allowing them to seep into the local water table. The residents claimed it was causing a cluster of rare illnesses, respiratory problems, autoimmune disorders, and most chillingly, a specific and aggressive type of early-onset neurodegeneration. Her heart felt like a block of ice in her chest. She scrolled frantically, her hands shaking. The lawsuit had been dismissed on a technicality. The company had hired a team of high-powered lawyers who had buried the plaintiffs in paperwork and procedural challenges until they ran out of money and gave up. The company never admitted any wrongdoing. With a growing sense of dread, Carmen searched for the name of the parent company that had owned the plant, the faceless corporation that had crushed the lawsuit and abandoned the town. She found it in a dusty old financial report from 1998. The owner of the Silver Creek chemical plant, the company responsible, was a vast, sprawling conglomerate with dozens of subsidiaries. A conglomerate named Finch Enterprises. The room started to spin. Carmen gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white. Alfred Finch, the man who had swooped in like a guardian angel, the man who had saved her mother, his company, his factory, his chemicals. The connection was undeniable. The timeline matched up. Her mother had lived in Silver Creek, drinking that water, breathing that air for 30 years. The symptoms described in the lawsuit were a perfect match for Evelyn's rare condition. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a cause. The catch she had been waiting for had finally arrived, and it was a monster. The man who had given her a new life was the same man whose company had, in all likelihood, poisoned her mother and sentenced her to a slow, agonizing death. Her entire reality, so recently and beautifully rebuilt, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The following 2 months passed in a surreal blur for Carmen. Her old life of exhaustion and despair was replaced by a world of purpose and security. True to Alfred Finch's word, her mother Evelyn was enrolled in the experimental treatment program. The results were nothing short of miraculous. The fog in Evelyn's mind began to clear. Her memories returned in sharp, brilliant flashes, and during one tearful visit, she recognized Carmen instantly, her voice clear as she said, "My sweet girl, I've missed you." For Carmen, every dollar of Mr. Finch's generosity was repaid in that single moment. At the Finch Foundation, she thrived. The initial terror of her new position gave way to a quiet confidence. She wasn't just managing funds, she was changing lives. She approved grants for families on the brink of eviction, funded after-school programs, and ensured elderly couples received the medical equipment they needed. This was the work she was born to do, and the gratitude she felt toward Alfred Finch was boundless. He was her savior, the benevolent force who had not only rescued her and her mother, but had also given her the power to rescue others. This sense of security made the eventual crash all the more devastating. The catalyst was a new directive from Mr. Finch. He wanted her to identify a single community for a large-scale revitalization project. The goal was to find a town that had been economically shattered by industrial decline and never recovered. As she sifted through dossiers of dying towns, one name leapt out at her: Silver Creek, her hometown. A wave of nostalgia washed over her as she opened the file. She and her mother had left when she was 10, but she still remembered the town square and the river valley. The report outlined its tragic history, a thriving community built around a single chemical processing plant that had shut down 20 years ago, leaving economic ruin in its wake. But as Carmen dug deeper, using the Foundation's powerful research tools, a much darker story emerged. She found archived newspaper articles detailing a lawsuit from the late 1990s. Residents had sued the plant's parent company, alleging that years of improper chemical disposal had poisoned the local water table. The lawsuit claimed the contamination had caused a cluster of rare and aggressive illnesses, including a specific type of neurodegeneration. Carmen's blood ran cold as she read the list of symptoms. They were a perfect match for her mother's condition. With a shaking hand, she searched for the name of the parent company that had owned the plant, the corporation that had hired a team of powerful lawyers to crush the lawsuit and silence the townspeople. When the name appeared on her screen, a strangled gasp escaped her lips. The owner of the Silver Creek chemical plant was a vast conglomerate named Finch Enterprises. The room began to spin. Her savior and the architect of her suffering were one and the same. The job, the apartment, the money for her mother's treatment, it was all funded by the same corporate machine that had poisoned her. It wasn't a gift. It was blood money, a cosmic debt being repaid without a word of admission. The old Carmen would have crumbled, but her new role had forged a spine of steel within her. Rage cold and pure replaced her shock. She would not be a pawn in Alfred Finch's game of silent penance. For the next week she lived a double life. By day she was a model employee. By night she was a relentless investigator, using her high-level access to unearth every buried secret. She compiled a thick binder filled with damning evidence, internal memos hinting at cost-effective waste disposal, secret settlement payments to silence the most vocal residents, and a list of names, the sick, the dying, and the dead of Silver Creek. Her mother's story was not unique. It was one of hundreds. When the binder was complete, she sent a single terse email to Mr. Finch's assistant, urgent meeting required regarding the Silver Creek project. The meeting was set for the following day at 4:00 p.m. on the 75th floor. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, each floor a step closer to a reckoning. Carmen clutched the binder to her chest, a shield of truth against the empire of secrets she was about to confront. Alfred Finch's office was a kingdom in the sky, a cavern of glass and steel with a god's-eye view of the city. He stood waiting for her, a silhouette against the afternoon sun. "Carmen," he said, his voice as calm and controlled as ever. "Please sit." She ignored the chair, walking directly to his massive desk and placing the binder on its polished surface with a definitive thud. "I've finished my research on Silver Creek, Mr. Finch," she began, her voice steady despite the frantic hammering in her chest. "I agree, it's the perfect candidate for our project. It's a town that was destroyed by corporate negligence, a town poisoned by a chemical plant." His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, were locked on hers. "A plant that was owned by Finch Enterprises," she continued, pushing the binder toward him. "It's all in there. The lawsuit your lawyers buried, the chemicals that leached into the water, the list of people who got sick. People like my mother, Evelyn. Her illness wasn't a random tragedy. It was a consequence. Your company did this to her." The accusation hung between them, heavy and absolute. She braced herself for denial, for rage, for the swift and brutal retaliation of a billionaire cornered. But Alfred Finch did none of those things. He simply stared at her, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his armor. His face, usually a mask of command, seemed to slacken with genuine shock. He was silent for a long moment, before he spoke, his voice a low, tired rasp. "I am the head of a global corporation with hundreds of subsidiaries. For 40 years, my executives have been paid to handle problems like this, so they never reach my desk. They are paid to make things disappear." He finally looked down at the binder, then back at her, and his eyes were filled with a profound weariness. "But ignorance is not innocence. The responsibility is, and has always been, mine." He sank into his chair, looking suddenly like an old man, crushed by the weight of a history he had never known. "I am not asking for your forgiveness. I am asking what you want me to do." Carmen hadn't expected the question. She had prepared for a fight, not a surrender. "I want justice," she said, the words coming from the deepest part of her. "For my mother. For everyone in that town." Alfred nodded slowly, a somber resolve hardening his features. He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the sprawling city his empire had built. "When I hired you, I was looking for a person of integrity to guide my foundation," he said, his back to her. "I had no idea I was the one who was so morally lost." He turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a new and fearsome purpose. "This is no longer philanthropy. This is restitution. The Silver Creek project is now the Foundation's sole priority. You will remain its head. Your budget is no longer $5 million. Your budget is now unlimited." He stepped toward her, his voice imbued with an authority that was absolute. "You will build a state-of-the-art medical facility and provide lifelong care for every affected resident. You will create a compensation fund for the families. You will clean the water and restore the land. You will not give them charity. You will give them back what was stolen from them." He stopped directly in front of her, his expression raw and open. "I hired you to be my moral compass, Carmen. Now I need you to help me cleanse the rot from my own house." Tears streamed down Carmen's face, tears of vindication, of sorrow, and of a fierce, defiant hope. This was more than she could have imagined. It was a chance to heal not just her mother, but an entire community wronged by the man who now stood before her, asking not for forgiveness, but for a chance at redemption. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I will." Carmen's story reminds us that the true measure of our character isn't found in grand gestures when the world is watching, but in the small, quiet choices we make when we think no one is. It started with her last $2, a seemingly insignificant amount. But in giving it away, she wasn't just buying coffee. She was making a statement that compassion is more valuable than currency, that a stranger's dignity is worth more than her own comfort. This single act of grace didn't just bring a billionaire into her life, it brought a buried injustice into the light. It proves that one person armed with kindness and courage can indeed move mountains, or in this case, a corporate empire. Her story is a powerful testament to the idea that you never know how far the ripples of a single good deed will travel. If this story moved you, and you believe in the power of kindness to change the world, please take a moment to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true life stories. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.